Welcome, everyone. This is Jan Barlow, and I am your host today for the HR Disruptor Summit 2021 Speaker Series. Welcome, everybody. As you all log in or view, please let me know if you can hear me, you can see me. Would love to know where you're coming in from, what country, what state. So please feel free to just enter in the chat. All right, as everybody dials in, thank you again for joining us today for the HR Disruptor Summit. We are continuing on with our 8-week Fall 2021 Speaker Series event. And today you just have me. I'm going to be speaking with you today about behavior diversity. We had a lot of conversation here in the last probably 3 or 4 days, I know, online about behavior diversity and traditional diversity. So really looking forward to engaging with you about this topic. And I have to share with you also that we're having a slight technical difficulty sharing screen today. So we may have to just discipline our disappointment and get an active conversation going, as well as sharing some information about this relatively new topic. I think that you're going to relate. A lot of the posts that we've shared throughout probably the last couple of years when it came to behavior diversity are some of the most frequent situations that people really can relate to. Maybe you felt that you had a boss that micromanaged you. Maybe you felt that you had a coworker or colleague or maybe direct report that seemed to be too slow or work slower than you. And of course, there's always the very typical, there are some people in your office or that you maybe a friend or coworker or even family member that you, in your interactions with them, you felt bullied, right? So there's a lot of different ways that we have been experiencing behavior diversity and those resistance gaps, but we really have never put science behind it or really acknowledged how that has affected our experience at work. And then what really I'm looking forward to sharing with you is how that really affects equity leadership and how you really create an equitable leadership model in your company, right? And how that retains people, how that really makes your work experience better is when you really know about behavior diversity and understand the science behind it. It can really look at behavior change from that foundation of you first, and then how you perceive others and what that looks like. So, as again, anybody want to just chime in to make sure that you can hear me? I greatly appreciate it. So really to start, I wanted to share behavior diversity, a little bit about the story and how I had trademarked behavior diversity back in 2018, literally just reviewing past experiences with clients, their companies, why do their people stay, why do they go, looking at some of the situations where I've worked with managers and direct reports, teams, looking at that and my personal experience working for a global pharmaceutical company. It allowed me to really want to dig down and research what's the behavior piece all about. And really it came down to, why is unconscious bias training not working? So when we were looking at the history of diversity and inclusion training, that really came most popular in the 90s and late 80s and 90s. Well, fast forward to really 2019, Harvard Business Review did a research paper, a research report and a study about why isn't unconscious bias training working. So we have so many training programs, we have so much money being spent on it, but why isn't it working? Why isn't it more effective than what it is? So I dived deep into studying my clients' situations and had case studies of our own, and then took that information and dug deep into what causes us to change our behavior, right? How do people learn and how do they change their own behavior, right? What's that process that we as humans go through? So I took the equity leadership model that was traditionally built from academia, and that equity leadership model is about providing a creative space to where people can accept others and live and learn to their strengths, right? And reach higher expectations, higher achievements of their own performance, and then collectively as a team. So I started with that equity leadership model and then combined it with the behavior diversity um, mindset or the behavior diversity training concept, and then combined equity leadership through behavior diversity. So traditional unconscious bias training, what really is the block is how it's really perceived. The unconscious bias training is being perceived by participants as shame and blame. So that really came or hit home for me back in 2018. I'm a member of the North Texas Diversity Council, and we had on our board, we had a member that is, she's a psychiatrist. So she's a trained psychiatrist in human behavior. And she had taken the online unconscious bias, I guess it's a survey or assessment, and she took it 5 times because she kept on saying, I don't believe that I'm biased. So that's really what hit home to me when I realized that a trained psychological professional took it 5 times because that person believed that she wasn't biased. We are all biased. As human beings, we're programmed by our environment, by the people around us. That's just, just think of our brain and our body as a C drive of the computer, right? We're a hard drive. All our environment and programming, what people say to us, what we think about ourselves, that creates a program within us and how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others. So when I was looking at really the effectiveness of unconscious bias training, I was also researching why it wasn't working. But then to add that additional personal experience of a trained professional, psychiatric professional, not being able to accept or connect with the fact that we all as human beings have biases, that really hit home and made me want to really dig down deep and start to bring solutions and share solutions that could help bridge this gap of acceptance of others. So fast forward, we started doing case studies. We started doing one-on-one focus groups with the behavior diversity training. So we really started out looking at how people really perceive the unconscious bias training. And what we found is there's 2 really steps that happen when people are receiving the information, the traditional unconscious bias training. First, there's a psychological block that happens. So when a person becomes, I guess you want to say, defensive because they're saying that they're not biased, right? It's hard for them to believe that they're biased. There's a psychological switch that goes off in our brain, and it then resorts to us in a fight or flight mode. So that resistance that happens in our brain really is about fear of what people are going to think about us. So that literally puts us on the defensive. And then from a physical perspective, it then shuts off our hearing. So literally, there's a psychological and physical wall with our hearing from this learned information. So you're sitting in 4 hours or whatever of unconscious bias training, and in your head, I mean, you're listening, You understand the information, but it's not being absorbed. You're not really taking it in because of that perception and defensive mechanism that's going off. So, from that standpoint, you literally are just sitting in the class, you're acknowledging the information that you're hearing, but it's not doing anything to change your behavior or your perceptions of yourself or others. So, fast forwarding, you know, diversity training deals with all the external, right? It's mostly age, sex, disability, race, all the external differences that we have from one another. Behavior diversity talks about and is about deference over difference. It's respect over focusing on how different we are. So, from the standpoint of traditional diversity, deals with external elements. Behavior diversity talks about elements of our behavior, talking about pace, decisiveness, assertiveness, judgment, like how do we take in, are we more intuitive versus factual? Decisiveness, how fast do we, or know, what's the scale on how quickly we make a decision? So there are 9 different elements of behavior diversity that are measured to really get down and start talking and engaging and communicating to learn more about yourself and in relationship to others. So when we talk about perception, I want to really get a little deep with that, because it comes down to our perception really is affected by behavior, and our perception of others is affected by that behavior. How we perceive our surroundings and other people is our reality, and that reality is different for everybody. So is it not true you can have a friend, so say like you have 3 friends that all have one common friend, and you each have 3 different relationships or types of relationships with that one friend, right? You all know that one person, but you'll have 3 different experiences with that person because each of you are different people, right? You have different your behavioral makeup, so your dynamics of your relationship are different. So when we look at exploring external differences versus internal, true change and acceptance of others happens within. And through behavior diversity training, we're walking people through that, really the 2-step process of acknowledging or recognizing themselves, who they are, and then in relationship to others. So from the bigger picture. So an example, when I first took this assessment, specific behavioral assessment, that's an objective normative assessment. It measures me against X amount of people, right? It allowed me to look at each of the scales of behavior. It's also considered a job matching tool. So I used that particular tool when I was creating my strategy for my business. So I wanted to see what role specifically I was going to play and what I should outsource. I looked at the behavior scales, and specifically for any behavior scales that were lumped one end to the other, whether a 1, 2, or 3, or an 8, 9, and 10, that really showed on a bell curve from the big picture relating from me to 140,000 people who were included in this study, where I fell in that big picture. So for really 50% on a scale of 1 to 10, 50% of those 140,000 people score between a 4 and a 6 between any of those behaviors. I scored on independence a 10. So not really understanding, well, what does that mean in the big picture? I found out that if you score a 1 or a 10 on any of those scales, you represent 2.5% of 140,000 people. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense why I feel kind of unique when it comes time to doing things. I like doing things on my own. I like taking a project and running with it. And that kind of makes sense. And then all of a sudden, the next wave hit me. Well, Jan, that means that 97.5% of 140,000 people aren't like you, so you shouldn't expect it. That, my friend, was the next level of looking at people and others differently, because now it set the expectation of, hey, yes, you acknowledge that you're different in this area. You relate to it. That confirmed it from a scientific standpoint. But now you got to look at, when you're working with others, now you have a responsibility to say, oh, then I shouldn't expect that same from others. So when it comes to working with our team on projects, I know I'm a 10 on independence. So that means 97.5% of a lot of people aren't going to work like me. So I always want to make sure that we have specific solutions and communication processes in place to where I know the work or the project's moving along, and then my team is getting the feedback necessary to keep the project moving along, right? So, but looking at this from a case study and experience with clients and with our other focus groups, I really wanted to share with you how this affects on a large corporate level and how that affects your ROI. Working with a major pharmaceutical company, I had really a unique position that I created there. I worked both with the clinical affairs and the clinical departments, as well as the sales division, sales and marketing. In a medical device or pharmaceutical company, we work with the FDA. So for any approvals, our department was going for a second generation FDA approval for our laser. So of course, marketing and clinical and R&D have to work together to go through what's called the red folder process. So really it's a true process of where each department tests have to be run, standards, protocols, procedures. There's a process. And so that red folder gets taken to every department because they have to check off the box and do what they need to do for the project. I would go back and forth between our home office at sales and marketing and also with clinical in Orlando. So I was playing both sides of the fence. I was seeing the big picture. What we were experiencing clearly was communication silos. So I would fly to our sales and marketing team and they'd say, Jan, where's the red folder? And I would say, it's in Orlando. It should have been here this week. I was expecting it to be delivered to you. And he says it's not there. So, we found ourselves going back and forth trying to find out what's going on with this process. And I found that under one roof, we had a whole team of different departments that were in silos, communication silos. They were sitting on information. So it really was frustrating because I was like, why, the building was only 125 people under one roof. And one department would say, well, R&D's not doing this, or they're not getting us this information. And the basic question would be, well, did you ask them for it? And they'd say, yeah, we sent them an email. Okay, well, so why wouldn't you just walk down to their office and talk to them about it, right? That's from my standpoint. So looking at really the differences when it came to, quote, personalities, it really came from a broader perspective of saying, oh my gosh, like if I weren't the one in between going back and forth, we wouldn't have anything moving forward. We just have everybody in a stalemate. So fast forward, We did all we could do. We tried, to talk to the directors of each department, but nobody was really embracing the importance of this problem. They just kept on saying, well, why don't we just, take everybody out bowling, or why don't you just take everybody out to lunch? And that wasn't working. You know, it's just like it doesn't work today. You have to really drill down and start understanding why people behave the way they behave. So in the end, what happened was, we didn't get the company didn't get the FDA approval. And they had 5 years prior had bought this company. So they bought the laser company, acquired them for 900 million. It was close to $1 billion. So they invested into the company. They 5 years, then 4 to 5 years goes down in time. And now they have over not only 1 billion plus, but probably close to $2 billion invested in this laser and the people and the project for a next generation uh, product, and they failed. So what does that look like from a ROI and company perspective? That whole division pretty much was reorganized. They had to close down the Orlando office. They restructured the whole department. So there were at least 150 people that were out of jobs within 6 months to a year. So really understanding that behavior diversity and addressing these issues from a higher perspective, this means money. We're losing money, not only because we're losing people, because we're not retaining them, because they're leaving because of perception. They're not able to communicate. They feel a resistance gap with their manager. I mean, it's really some basic elements that should be discussed and revealed, and training needs to be embraced around it so we can start understanding one another at a deeper level. A next client of mine had, it was a nonprofit that's been around in the Dallas Fort Worth area for over 100 years. And it's a foster care organization. And they went to expand their department, and they went to hire someone for a new role. Now, normally my clients call me up, especially if it's a new role. We create what's called a job match pattern that is specifically to the job at that company. And then we go through a holistic process of um, interviewing people and taking those candidates and really putting them through that job match process and managerial fit process. So it's a holistic process. It's not what we're experiencing today is after you get the job, you have no idea who you're dealing with, right? So, but this client went to a previous employer that she used to work with, said that she thought that she found the great candidate that she knew, but hadn't worked with, but she knew of him. So fast forward, hired the person. There was no job description written. Went through the process of creating the job match pattern, matched the person. Unfortunately, they were not a high match. So I'm all about how do we keep people out of harm's way? So the best thing that I did was to take the report that we created for a managerial fit that reviewed communication and how they would work together. It ends up, we really pointed out the specific areas where there would be behavior resistance gaps. So anywhere on the scales, there are two numbers. So you have scales that range from 1 to 10. And if we can all stretch two numbers forward and backwards, right? And we can always stretch and accommodate. But what happens to a rubber band when it stretches too much? It breaks, right? So fast forward, we sat down and shared with them the different areas that they would experience resistance gaps, and it would really wear on their relationship and work environment. We offered solutions on how to bridge those resistance gaps. And luckily, at the end, I was very pleased that the manager was very excited and said to the new hire, we really need to thank Jan for this opportunity because it really changed my perception of you. And the candidate or the new hire said, well, what do you mean? And this was the really the big picture that hit home for me is when she said, if I hadn't known about these resistance gaps in these different areas, in 6 months, I would have thought that you couldn't keep up with the job and I would have had to let you go. So, from the standpoint of how would you feel if you were, hired by someone and they said, this is a new job, new position, it's a perfect match for you, this is great, you buy into it, you leave your current position that you were happy with, right? You really weren't looking for a job. You then leave, and then all of a sudden, now 6 months into the job, you're told you're not doing your job and you're not performing well. I don't know about you, but that would upset me because it's up to the employer to know what they need for the job. Specifically, what type of person, what skill set are they needing? So for me, I'm all about helping and teaching people how to keep and stay out of harm's way. And to me, it's up to the employer to really have the objective science tool in place to be 1/3 of the decision making process to keep people out of harm's way, right? And to find the right person for the job. So, was very excited to see that at least we could bring to the table some solutions to where they at least had a better opportunity to and a better chance of success for working together. Anybody else want to come on in? If you have any questions, any stories, I want to be able to bring you in on this conversation. Love it. Thank you, Tina. Yes, absolutely. So, Tina, thank you calling in from Indiana. Thank you. She's in the chat. She's saying that her experience was that she was hired. Uh, they, the CEO, she's had the CFO, all C-suite wanted her, said she was the one, and within 9 months they said that she wasn't performing. So yeah, I get that. I get that, and that's what I'm saying. That no, we can't continue this on anymore. This is just we're in the 2021. Why are we still using just a resume and an interview to really know people? It just really doesn't make sense, right? Anybody else? Okay, now don't be shy. All right. Well, so anyway, so when we're talking about the last example I wanted to share with you, we did a case study with a community college and a DE and I team of 14 people. We did a blind study. So we wanted to make sure, hey, let's get this as clinical as possible. So we did a blind study of 14 people and we took their assessments, looked at the opposites, right? So looked at any resistance gaps, behavior resistance gaps, put those people together that had the resistance gaps. And I got to tell you, we found there was only one area out of 14 people, one area where they all were more than two numbers difference. So there wasn't any behavior diversity there. What we really found out from the survey that we did previously and afterwards, the team was experiencing a lack of innovation. So they were getting really apathetic. So it came down to they were experiencing, I like to say ignorance and apathy. I don't know and I don't care. So that was really affecting their performance as a department. So going forward, when after the study, we found out, okay, you don't have enough behavior diversity, you don't have creative people or enterprising people. Who are you exactly missing? What are the qualities of behavior that you're missing that's going to add to that mix of true diversity that brings innovation and creativity into the group, right? So we ended up putting a program together for them. So going forward, all their new hires and all their top candidates for any position is assessment, so they can also review what's what value are these people going to be adding to us. They want to make sure that they get a good mix of behavior diversity and those types of skill sets that adds value to that organization. So we're very excited also to announce that we are going to be coming up in November. I'll also be posting this on social and messaging each of you that book that you wanted to attend the event. The workshop is going to be actually a master class, and it's going to be an intro to behavior diversity masterclass, and it's going to be an hour. So look forward to your participation of that. But we're excited to be able to share that information with you and get you involved so you can really experience firsthand the behavior diversity training, and then be able to take back to your company or organization. How can you create an equity leadership training model in your company so it's way beyond DE&I? It's also just a learning environment. How can you bring a better learning or equitable learning environment into your organization that really harnesses and leverages people's strengths and allows them to perform at a higher level? So we'll be giving you more information about that soon. And if anybody has any more questions, please chime in. But look forward to posting this recording and getting more dialogue coming through. So again, thank you all for viewing today and sharing some space and time with me today. And look forward to continuing and engaging in this conversation of behavior diversity and equity leadership. Have a great day, everybody. See you next week.